Briana, could you explain what you mean by racialized trauma, racialized stress, and how does it affect us in the worst ways as well as, well, we can get into the other part later, but basically, how do you define it and how does it affect us?
So, good morning, Baba. Thank you for having me here again today. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so
It's a
sorry.
great pleasure, lady.
I'm so sorry my presentation because I had a whole bunch of good little zuzus and wham whams, but I'll try to talk through this. So, as an African American person living in this country, the first thing that happens to me when I show up in a place is that people see me through a lens, and that lens is based on whiteness. All bodies are compared to white supremacy. And so anything other than that is othered or marginalized. And so rather than being coming in as a woman who is white, who is thin, who speaks softly, who has blue eyes, and who has blonde hair, I'm othered because I'm different than all of that. I have a very powerful and passionate voice. I come with delivery and determination. My skin is brown. Uh, Under this hat here, my hair is gray. And so that otherness can make me feel internalized, make me experience my internalized oppression more often than not. And so what racialized trauma does is that it compares everybody based on your background, the color of your skin, or where you come from, or where your people come from. And then we are not treated equally. There's a lot of isms that go on along with that, and differences. There's power and privilege in having whiteness. The world is white centered, as you saw yesterday in that trial. Um, and so racialized trauma happens on an internal level, and it does cause stress and anxiety. When you witness the things that happen to our people over and over and over again, this has an impact on your mind, your body, and your spirit. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. How are we impacted by stress and chronic stress, and how race plays a part in that? And then we're going to take a look at clean pain and dirty pain. And then I'm going to give you some tools for self-care around these issues. How can you take care of yourself in situations when you are othered and marginalized every single solitary day of your life? It's a visceral feeling. It's in your cells, in your DNA. It's passed down from generation to generation through epigenetics, through our DNA. And so, in some kind of way, it's not some kind of way, amazingly, we continue to survive. We continue to help one another. We continue to pull each other up, and we continue to thrive. And that's what we have to do these days: thrive rather than survive. We have to thrive. And so we need 5 elements to be able to do that. We need to be able to feel safe. We need to be able to feel secure. We need to be able to be seen. We need to be stable and have stabilization in our lives. And when we don't have these elements on a significant level, then we are no longer adapting. We are no longer standing in our power. So we have to see each other. We have to help each other feel safe. We have to help each other feel secure. We have to help each other feel stable by encouraging and motivating and watching shows like yours, Baba. So that's what I wanted to say about racialized trauma. You want me to go ahead with the presentation?
No, let's want to flesh this out
Okay.
a little bit more. So just give some examples of how how racialized trauma is experienced by Black people. Just give a few examples. Yeah.
Well, a few examples of how we have racialized trauma. We have racial tension. And so let's take, for example, if you're walking down the street. I'll give a perfect an example. One time I came upon this a white lady. I love lapis. So she had a large lapis stone around her neck. And so I walked up to her, and I came upon her too suddenly, and she backed up. It was a natural reaction. And she was immediately afraid of me. simply because I went into her space, but I also didn't look like her. And because of her bias, she automatically felt afraid of me. So when you see, we're conditioned in this country to be afraid of Black men, for example. Even Black people have the fear of Black men. And that's because of conditioning, and that's what racialized trauma is about: being conditioned to not accept or see or be with something that's other than you. So those are biases. We either have implicit bias or explicit bias. And so when you are out in the world and people are telling you to be afraid, I mean, you could see the examples of Black men getting shot and the trials that are going on right now. That's due to racialized trauma. And then they'll turn it around and say that they were afraid of us. And so when you are afraid of something, or a body that doesn't look like yours, you react to that. And because we are in a white supremacy society, then they are conditioned to say, yes, they are afraid of us. Why? Because they don't see us as human beings for the most part. And so when you have this kind of fear and terror about a person or a situation that does not look like you, then you respond from your fight, flight, or freeze element. So either you will fight back, or you will run, or you'll just get frozen and you can't move. And so those are my examples of racialized trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and let me tie that in to another framework, which is the history of that.
Okay.
So Blacks coming into this country
Mm-hmm.
as enslaved people, first as indentured servants, 1619, and then that's transformed into enslavement. Um, we have, so, we're dealing with the situation that tries to negate our humanity, which is what racism does. In effect, say you're not a human being and treat you that way. And so we're being treated worse than dogs or horses or mules or anything else. And so we come out of societies where that's completely alien and completely foreign. And we resent that because we have a basic idea of our humanity. And African societies are basically humanistic in their orientation, and African people to this day are, even when we have scars and issues. So over time, we begin to develop a response to what we call racism. And that response has to do with us seeing that we're oppressed based on the color of our skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what I want to do is convey that there's two sides to racialized trauma or racism. One side is the depressing side that causes stress, trauma, and everything else. But there's another side that's a liberatory side. And this is the other side of it. So in the case of enslavement, we had a situation where Blacks began to define themselves partially based on how we're viewed, that is, based on the color of our skin. So no longer are we defining ourselves as Asante, Yoruba, Dogon. We're Black, or whatever term we use to define ourselves then. And very often that term was African, in the beginning, African. We didn't come here calling ourselves that, but that becomes the unifying term. And so this becomes a point of identification. And this point of identification is a point of defining not the whole of peoplehood, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up under our culture, but it is the defining marker that we're Black or we're African. And associated with that is a lot of pride. We also know pain because we know we inherit all these problems with Blackness that we have to overcome. Fighting somebody because they call you Black. I ain't Black.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to fight if you call them African.
Right.
I ain't African. I'm an African American, but I ain't African. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
there's the two-sided, but basically the response to racism forges race consciousness, and that becomes a source of pride for a lot of our people. It's a point of identification. It's also a marker. It's a marker on whether or not people like you identify with that or not. And so if some, for a variety of reasons, brainwashing and otherwise, choose not to, we call them no nation. We had a term that's negative we don't use on this show, but I would say no nation Africans or no nation blacks, meaning you haven't chose to identify with us. And these black folks with a whole lot of other characteristics underneath blackness, um, we're a nation. That's how that term begins to be formulated in enslavement. You know what I mean? We're common people with a whole lot of things in common, culture, whatnot. But the demarcation point is your blackness. So are you with us? Are you against us? So this whole thing of racism, which is debilitating, vicious, can be deadly physically and psychologically, there's another side to it. And it's a question of how we walk through this stuff, because this is stuff we don't plan in life, which is to face all this mess. So this is kind of like an overriding thing with us. How do we see this? And then that has to do with how we handle this.